not the youngest. If you were there, it didn't matter how old you were. They put you in those cells. The first time I was arrested at 8 years old, along with my grandmother and other women who had their babies with them. Some they had to carry, some were toddlers, but they were there. And they were put in the cells with us. And I count that 8-year-old arrest as an arrest because I was in that cell, okay? Now, in December of 1964, a letter of invitation was written to a man named Dr. Martin Luther King, inviting him to Selma. As you study Dr. King's movements, you'll find out he never went anywhere, that he wasn't invited. He just didn't show up one morning and say, I'm here, let's do this. He had to be invited by the people. The Dallas County Voters League, under the leadership of Dr. Frederick Douglass Reese, invited Dr. King to Selma. Dr. King brought to the Selma movement exactly what he brought to every movement. I call it the 3 M's. He brought money. No revolution can be fought without finance. He brought motivation. Every time I hear his voice, even today, I want to get up and save the world. And he brought the media. Without the media, without those 3 ingredients, even today, you can't have any change. Things really heated up when Dr. King got to Selma. He brought in his lieutenants and he stationed them in counties all around us. So voter registration drives were going on in these counties. He sent Reverend James Orange to Perry County, small rural county approximately 30 miles west of us. Marion is the county seat. In Marion, Reverend Orange found it easier to organize students. After all, their parents worked for the same people who were trying to keep us from getting the right to vote. They marched on their courthouse and were arrested, all of them, including Reverend Orange. Reverend Orange himself told me that a state trooper came into the area where he was housed with a rope. On the end of that rope was tied a noose. He said he positioned that noose in his cell where he had to look at it the rest of the day knowing it may be his last day on earth. That evening they let the children out. They kept Reverend Orange. The children ran into a church where they were having this mass meeting and disrupted this meeting. They said, you have to do something. You have to do something now. They're going to kill him. The people in the church decided that they would go down to that jail and walk around it all night long in hopes that their mere presence would save this man's life. When they left the church, they were attacked and brutally beaten by law enforcement officers. A young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson emerged from the church just in time to see a state trooper meeting his grandfather, his 82-year-old grandfather. Jimmy ran over and pleaded with this trooper, but Jimmy's mom saw him beating her dad too, and she ran over. She approached that trooper, drew back his billy club to hit her. And Jimmy did exactly what I would have done. He stepped in front of his mom. That trooper shot him. Jimmy died 8 days later. It was then that the leaders decided to walk from Selma to Montgomery to protest this young man's senseless death and to demand the right to vote from our then Governor George Wallace. On March 7, 1965, we gathered on the playground of George Washington Carver Homes and led by John Lewis, who represented SNCC, and Hosea Williams, who represented SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King's organization. We came down Broad Street and over the Edmund Pettus Bridge and met a wall of policemen. When that line stopped, John Lewis asked permission to pass. Policemen said there would be no march between Selma and Montgomery. You have 2 minutes to disperse and go back to your home or your church. In less than 15 seconds, they attacked. Now, I had never experienced violence. Marching was fun to me. I liked the spirit of the movement. You know, the songs, the chants, being with my friends, not going to school. I liked all of that. But we crossed that bridge and I could see across. I saw policemen lined all the way across all 4 lanes of Highway 80. I kind of knew then we were not going to Montgomery that day. As I came down further, I noticed the service roads on each side were filled with policemen. Some in cars, some standing, some sitting on cars, some were even sitting on horses. Which confirmed we were not going to Montgomery that day. I was too far back in the line to hear what was being, or see what was happening down front. I didn't need to. I was a warrior. I knew the procedure. I knew when John Lewis and Hosea got to that line of policemen, one of them would ask permission to pass. It would be denied. John and Hosea would go down on their knees and we would follow suit. One of them would say a prayer. And after prayer, we stand up and go back to where we started from. You either plan a new strategy or you just regroup and come right back. I'm standing there waiting for the front to go down so I too could kneel, but suddenly I hear gunshots and screams. I think they're killing the people down front. Before we could turn to run, it was too late. They came in from both sides, the front and the back. There was just nowhere to go. And they were just beating people. Old, young, black, white, male, female, it didn't matter. They were just beating people. People lay everywhere bleeding, not moving as if they were dead. And you couldn't stop to help them, or you'd be beaten too. The gunshots I heard, no one was shooting live ammo on that bridge that day. It was a tear gas can being shot into the crowd. Tear gas burns your eyes, gets in your lungs. You can't breathe, you can't see, you panic. Oftentimes you run right back to the same people you're running from. It seemed like it lasted an eternity. If you could outrun those men on foot, you couldn't outrun the ones on horses. The poor horses were afraid. They were running the horses right into the crowd. They were rearing and kicking and screaming. People were being trampled. Bones were being broken. The last thing that I remember that day on that bridge is seeing a horse and this lady. And I don't know what happened. Did the man on the horse run over her with the horse, or did he hit her and she fell? I do know as I stand here 59 years later, I can still hear the sound her head made when it hit that pavement. The next thing I remember, I was on the city side of the bridge. I was in the back of a car. My head was in my sister Linda's lap, and Linda was crying. When I became fully awake, I realized what was falling on my face was not my sister's tears. It was her blood. My 14-year-old sister had been beaten on that bridge and had wounds in her head. There were quite 35 stitches, 7 over her right eye and 28 in the back of her head. Yet on that following Tuesday, when Dr. King came back, because he was not there on the 7th, when Dr. King came back, I held that sister's hand as we followed Dr. King and Dr. Abernathy across that same bridge. When I crested that bridge, I'm not ashamed to tell you that I didn't want any more freedom. When I saw the same scene I had seen that Sunday, I tried to go back. I didn't want to go. I was scared. But my sisters wouldn't let me. They held my hand and kept talking, trying to coax me across. Finally, I remember one of them saying, "Come on, they're not going to beat Dr. King." I went, but I was terrified. This time, Dr. King himself asked permission to pass. The policeman told him the same thing. There would be no march, but this time the front went down. Dr. Abernathy said a prayer. And after prayer, he and Dr. King stood and led us back to Brown Chapel AME Church, where Dr. King held a mass meeting. At that mass meeting, he told us he had applied for a court order that would give us the legal right to walk from Selma to Montgomery if we so wanted to. But more importantly, be protected. That order was signed on March 17th by a judge in Montgomery named Frank Johnson, who said he signed it not because he believed in what those Negroes were doing. He said, I signed it because it's the law. And on March 21st, 4 days later, we left Brown Chapel one more time, came down Broad Street and over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and those same policemen who beat us up on the 7th had to protect the marchers all the way from Selma to Montgomery, 54 miles. There are no motels between Selma and Montgomery today. There were none then. It took 5 days to get to that capital. 5 days. Everything had to be brought to the marchers. I walked the first 10 miles and the last leg from St. Jude in Montgomery to the Capitol. My sister Linda, who received the 35 stitches, became the youngest person to walk every step of the way from Selma to Montgomery. And she enjoyed her 15th birthday on the 2nd day on the trail. And August 6th of that very same year, the Voting Rights Act was signed. And it removed those obstacles that prevented us from voting. And that same act has been under attack ever since. You know, that voting thing must be awfully valuable, huh? Because every time I turn around, they're trying to take it away from a group of people. Now, I grew up during a shameful time in the United States, and you may look and say we've come a long way, which we have. It's just that we had so far to go, that we're not where we need to be. And that's a heck of a responsibility to put on our children, to say, we've gotten you this far. How far can you take us? The average educational age of the people who secured the rights that you wear so arrogantly, and you should, because we are really proud of you, was 8th grade. I heard master's, maybe one day PhD. I heard graduation, you're going to be an attorney. And these young people will decide what they want to be, where their piece in the puzzle is supposed to be. This was shameful. The problem today is, just as the local president said, Mr. Brown, that our schools are segregated again. And isn't it amazing that since the schools are of color now, that we don't have enough money for public education. We cut those. We find ways to channel that same money that used to go into public education to private schools. If private schools are the standard, shouldn't public schools be the same? We, in Selma, when I graduated from high school in 1971, a program was instituted called tracking. Yeah. And we had like 4 levels. You know, you had honors, then you had, I don't even know what they call the 2nd level. And then the 3rd level was regular. What is regular? And of course, special education was closed. All the black children in Selma were in the last 2. The last 2. And when the parents went to the schools to complain, you know what they said? The computer did it. The computer made the choices. If you start a child with low expectations, what are you going to have when he finishes? Yeah, well, when I came home from the United States Army in 1989, right in the middle of that movement, and I was appalled that people would do such things as this to young people. In 1967, I, along with several others, integrated our white high school. It wasn't that nice. I'd go home every day crying. And then, you know, I grew up in the hood, so I always get expelled. I always got suspended for at least 3 days once a month. But called me a name, I'm gonna knock their head away. Anyway, I just couldn't take it. But why in 1967 are we just integrating the 8th grade? When was this? 1954? Isn't that interesting? What kind of world we live in? You see how far we have to go and how much time it takes to get us there? And people, I've talked to people who say, well, you do have that, and I'm supposed to be satisfied. I'm supposed to be satisfied with that. And sometimes we accept that as the norm and say there's nothing we can do about it. You know what's wrong with the world today? They haven't heard your voice. They haven't heard your voice. You need to join the NAACP. Your voice needs to be heard. Your ideas need to be on the table. If Dr. King had been on that bridge in 1965, you think we'd be voting now? If he had been there alone, you think he'd been voting now? I don't think so. They would have killed him and walked down to the Gulf and never heard of it again. But because it had been organized and there were a whole bunch of people who were there for the same cause, it worked. It worked. And what we did in Selma not only was changed Alabama, it changed this nation. It changed this nation. So whatever you do here in Ohio will come to Alabama. Will come to Alabama. So I want you to do your best. I want you to join. If it's not the NAACP, and I hope it is since I'm here. I couldn't help that. But if it join something, get together. Your voices need to be heard. We stand by silently and watch things happen and not say a word. I had a special request, and I need to do that before I sit down, because I'm not talking to you all that long time like they have on that program. I think about after 20 minutes you're bored. Because I would be. Anyway, when I was a kid, I couldn't try on clothes. For those of you who purchased this, I'm going to tell you the first story that's in this booklet, okay? And I'll tell you why. My dear friend, Penny Wells, said, I hope you tell the shoe story. There was a story in Selma called Maya's Shoe Store. We grew up poor. Our clothing came from places like Youngstown, Ohio, because we had relatives that would gather clothing throughout the year for us. It didn't have to be new clothing. We rarely got new clothing, but it was new to us because we didn't have one. So we eagerly awaited that box. It came about 3 times a year. Well, this particular year was around Easter, and we were waiting for that box to come. It finally got here. And we're gathered in the living room as grandmother goes through the box, and she pulls out the prettiest blue dress I've ever seen in my entire life. You know, it had those itty bitty pleats and that thin material that stood out with the slip up on it. And I have 2 older sisters, and they always get the best, and then they hand it down to me, right? Until I outgrew it, and God knows best. But anyway, grandmother looked at the dress, and she said, here, baby, go try this on. So I just knew my sisters were standing there, right? I look back, and no one is there. She's talking to me. I take the dress, and I go upstairs, and I put it on, and I instantly turned into a princess. And I was twirling around. I looked so pretty, just twirling around in the mirror until grandmother interrupted my dream. You don't have that dress on yet? So I had to go back downstairs, right? And I had to walk slow because I knew she was going to take the dress and give it to one of my older sisters. But as I came into view, grandmother said, "Oh, baby, you look so pretty in that dress." Well, I was blessed with big feet. So now I got a beautiful Easter dress, but no shoes in the box fit my foot. So grandmother looked at me, and to my surprise, she said, "We're going downtown Saturday, and I'm going to buy you some new shoes." I was ecstatic. New dress, new shoes. That never happened in my life. So I eagerly awaited that Saturday. I thought it would never come. But before we left the house, grandmother took a ball of yarn and she measured my foot. And she cut the string to that size. I didn't know what she was doing, I didn't care. She put it in her pocket. Now Maya's shoe store sits cat a corner. You guys know what that means? It means it faces the intersection, not the street. So there are windows on this side and there are windows on that side. Well, as soon as I got within view of the windows on the side, I saw my shoe. You know my shoe. You know what I'm talking about. You know your shoe when you see it. It's laying there on the floor. So I dropped my grandmother's hand and I ran into the store and I put my foot in it. And before I could settle my weight in it, grandmother had snatched me up out of it. And she was going on, "Don't you do that. Don't you snatch away from me. You stand right here." The store is packed. It's Easter, right? But while my grandmother was chastising me, the sales clerk found the other shoe in the box. And she put the one I had almost got into the box, put the top on it, and she said to my grandmother, "Here." Grandmother said, "Those are not her size," and she pulled the string from her pocket. She said, "If you get this size, I'll gladly pay for them." She said, "You don't understand. You don't understand. You have to pay for these shoes because that little nigger put her foot in it." My grandmother paid for the shoes. And we didn't have any more money for her to buy me another pair. So I knew I had done something wrong, but I didn't know what. Because they rarely took us to the stores. And I know now why, because they didn't know how we were going to react to segregation. Well, on the way home, I was full. You know, you get that pain in your throat because you want to cry. But my grandmother noticed, and she leaned down in front of me and she said, "I'm sorry, baby, but that's the law. Colored people can't try on shoes." She said, "When I get money, I'll buy you more." I couldn't wear those big shoes with my new dress, so I went to church that Easter Sunday with my beautiful new dress on and my old scuffed up Sunday shoes. And as I sat in the church and listened to the preacher say that Christ died for me, and all I could think about was, he forgot me. How could he put me through that much pain if he loved me too? Well, I've come a long way too, preacher. I've come a long way since then. A long, long way. But my only consolation was, as long as they were in Selma as a shoe store, I never bought any shoes from Maya's shoe store. Thank you for listening.
Give it up for Miss Joanne Bland.